Hi, I'm Robert. I'm the Film and Media Paraprof, and welcome to Layers and Such, the second lesson in my After Effects workshop series. So today we're going to cover a number of things, more than just layers and such. We're going to talk about importing footage and importing still images and Photoshop files, sort of more detailed than what we did last time. We're going to talk about actually editing the layers themselves and sort of how long they exist for, sequencing the layers. We're going to talk about effects and presets and how to apply them to the layers. We're going to talk about blending modes. We're going to talk about adjustment layers and some other cool stuff like that. So if everyone could open After Effects Creative Cloud, not CS6. If you're in the film and media, or if you're in the Cornerstone Labs, you want to make sure you're using Creative Cloud so it matches what we're using here on my computer. Okay, so let's get started. We need to download our super cool footage that I prepared for us today. I did not actually make it. To do so, we need to connect to the server. So if you go to Finder, so leave After Effects for a moment, and go to Finder, and then you do Command K. You can also do, I don't know where it is, View or something, Window. Just do Command K. And then you type in this address, smb://software.coloradocollege.edu/film. You're going to press connect, and mine opens automatically. Yours might ask you for a password. That's your username and password, your network username and password for CC. And that'll open up. We're going to go into AE Workshops, folder O2, Layers and Such, and we're going to just copy this whole sources folder onto your desktop. So mine's actually already there, but I was just pretending for your sake. And it is there. So this is someone else's footage called Sahara, and it's this whole collection of beautiful footage of the Sahara Desert. It's a little bit old, but I don't know, it's really cool. I found it on the Film and Media server. So let's import just this first folder called Animals into After Effects. So you can drag and drop, you can do Control Import. We talked about this last week. And open. So that's actually going to bring the whole folder in this nice little folder gets created in After Effects. So the first thing I wanted to talk about today is when you're using footage in After Effects, as opposed to last week when we were just working with still images, you can actually do a lot of stuff before you even make a new composition. So we have our, well, let's save our project. Once we've imported, we're always going to save. It's just good practice. Save as. I'm going to call it Lesson 2, Layers. You can call it whatever you want. And, oh, I forgot to do the incremented save. Oh well. Okay, so what you can do is you can actually pre-trim the layers to be of a certain length of time. So for example, let's just choose one of these. I like the camels in distance. I'm going to double click this. And this is going to open it in the what's called the footage panel. That's up here. See footage. And that's where the composition panel usually is. But this is actually the footage panel. So anything we do here is actually only affecting the footage itself in the project window. And you can see this is about, how long is this? You can see here it's 7 and 13 frames long. So it's a good long clip. And we can actually take this clip, and before we ever bring it down into the composition, we can choose the part we want. And this is very similar to if you're working in Adobe Premiere or Final Cut. You can sort of clip your sources before you ever bring them down into your timeline. So to do that, we're going to change sort of the in and out points. And you can see here when I hover over, it says trim the in point of the edit. So I can grab this little solid green line or thing, and I can move it around. So I'm going to put it here, say. It's kind of arbitrary, but that's okay. Let's say I just sort of want from this point on. And then the end one, we can either grab here, or you can use these little curly brackets to move the endpoints. And that sets it to where the little playhead is. So clicking the right endpoint, move the right out point here. If I click the left endpoint, that moves that one around. on and on. But I'll move it back to here. So now we've taken this sort of 7-second clip and made it a lot shorter. You can actually see here it says it's now 4 and 9 frames. And so we've pre-trimmed this. So now when we bring it into our composition, it's only the part we want. So what we can do too, another way to make a composition, is I'm going to now take camels in distance, drag it down onto this little shape down here at the bottom of the project window, click, and that actually makes a new composition. And it even names it camels in distance. So I don't want to call it that. We'll call it camels. And I'm going to take it out of the animals folder just so I don't lose it later. So then what you can do is you can actually take the clip called Camels in Distance that we've just edited, sort of pre-trimmed the in and out points for. And if you drag it down to the bottom of your project window over this, and that highlights blue, this little picture of the film strip with the circle, triangle, and square in it, that's the icon for a composition. If you drop it on there, it actually creates a new composition, and you can see now I have two, the one I made before and the one we just made. And it names it Camels in Distance. It just names it after whatever source you're putting in there. And it builds a whole new composition like we did last time, but it actually just does it all for you, and it matches all the settings to that clip that you just brought in there. Does that make sense? I'm just going to delete that second one. And then I made a little folder called Compositions and put camels in there. So now we have a composition that was built to match our footage, which is really handy because this footage is, I think it's actually even 480. It's not even high def because it's pretty old stuff that I found. And you see that the length of the footage actually matches the length that we set earlier when we were pre-trimming it. Now, if we want to see what we were doing before, and we will because we want to add some more layers, we're actually going to go to Composition Settings, which I got by Control-clicking down in here. You can also go to the top to Composition Settings. And you see duration here is 4 and 9 frames that we see again. Let's make that 20 frames, or 20 seconds, 0 frames. So we have lots and lots of room to work. It's not under duration, sorry. It's under composition settings. If you right-click in the, or control-click in the composition, not on the layer itself, just in that timeline somewhere. And then I just changed duration, which is a option in the composition settings, to 20 seconds, just so we had a little more room to work with our other footage once we bring that in. How's everyone doing on that? Yes, so all the footage is on the film server again, which if you go to Finder and do, so go to Finder, make sure you're in Finder, and then do Command K, and then it's SMB : / the other slashes, sorry, software.coloradocollege. Why isn't it? It is 20 seconds. Oh God, go back to composition settings. .edu/film.
So you 20 minutes?
20 minutes.
But then what is your spot? But then it's to black.
Yeah, it's black after the clip.
Oh, I think this one. Okay.
You'll see why I'll explain that in a sec. And then it's called Layers and Such.
Kind of copy to the desktop.
Yeah, actually, Colin, if you could go back in there and copy that either to your hard drive or the desktop instead of you already did? Okay, great. Just so it's not coming off of the server because we'll crash. Though with just one person, we're probably fine. Okay, so now that I've done, I've made a new composition out of the Camels in Distance clip, as it's called, and I've changed the time the length of my composition. You actually can't see that yet because my timeline window is still just matching the length of the composition I already have. But we can zoom out in here, and there's two ways to zoom out. We can move over here with this little slider. You can actually click on the mountains. Small mountains are zooming out, big mountains are zooming in. You can drag the slider around like that, or you can press the plus and the minus key, and that'll zoom you in and out. So you can see when I zoom all the way out, this is a full 20 seconds here, and there's lots of room of black after the clip ends. And you can see where I trim the clip is right here, and that's where it cuts out. But what you can also see here is that the clip itself, remember it was originally 7.5 seconds long, and then I cut it down to about 4 seconds. You can see the additional time is still here, these sort of grayed out, almost ghosted areas on either side. So that's sort of denoting where the clip originally existed, and then where I set those new in and out points when I was trimming it. And you can see them here. You can also edit those in and out points right here in the timeline by clicking on the edge here and dragging those around. Just like that. And of course you can move the layer in the timeline by moving it around here. You have a question over there? What's that?
How do you save it once you cut it?
How do you save it once you cut it? It saves automatically. So then the next step we did is we drag that clip and drag it down onto the composition window.
Yeah, but
Tell me more. Not from there,
saves it
just
automatically as
okay, so then you're going to drag the adjusting here. Just drag on top of that. It is cut, but you can't see it's cut until we actually add time to the composition. So then if you right click in here or composition settings, and then add duration there. So if you make that 3 and duration. So did you cut it at all? No. So the first thing we did right before we got here was cancel that. If you double click on it, and you open it up in this sort of footage panel, if you drag the ends down here, sorry, not like that thing, but like this sort of green box. The green box right sort of that is lightish. No, it's the one that's all the way up. But if you grab it by the ends, that arrow, you're actually moving in and out points of the clip. Okay. Kind of like you did. And then the other way to do it is you move that playhead to a point, and you can click these little brackets, and those are going to move it forward. So that's kind of a way of sort of pre-trimming the footage, and then you bring it down into the composition. Okay. So if you make a new composition out of this again, or so instead of, I mean, you can do it that way for sure, but if you grab the panels and distance in your source window, drag it on top of compositions there, a little icon that's right there to the left of the eight. That's a new composition, and that'll create this. Then if you now change the composition settings, change this to 20 seconds because you see it's only 5:18, which is the length that you can have out. So that's 20 frames, and the next one is 20 seconds. Yeah. And then once you hit OK, so then if you zoom out, you realize the little mountains down here with the plus or minus keys. Sorry for you go way out, you can see where it is. And it's only 5 seconds long. Okay, what was I last talking about? Right, so the other way you can trim clips is by actually just doing it right here in the timeline. Once you've got it in here, you can move those same in and out points around by moving that little line around. And you notice when you bring it all the way to the end, you know you've gotten to the end because this little black curvy triangle appears in the corner. That's all the way to the end. So that's the other way you can kind of trim what you've done. So let's get another clip in here. I'm going to go back to animals, and now I'm going to choose, what's landscape? I think that kind of matches. And I've double-clicked it again, so I can do some more editing in the footage panel up here. Let's say it's got this sort of pan across, and right about there, I'll cut out of it. So I've set 2 new in and out points. And this time, instead of creating a new composition, I'm just going to drag it down into the existing composition. So one way to do that is to literally just take landscape that I chose, or whatever source you choose over here in the source window, and drag that down into the layer panel. And you can choose whether you want it to be a layer on top or a layer below. So if you remember, we talked about last time sort of the priority order of the layers. Whatever's on top will be visible on top. The other way to do it is, while still in the panel where you were setting your in and out points, the footage panel, there are 2 handy little insert buttons. They're right here, down to the right, ripple insert and overlay edit. And I'll show you what each of those do. So overlay edit is pretty much what you do if you just drag it in. When you click that, it takes whatever's up in your footage panel and it drops it right where your playhead is in the timeline, and it puts it on top. So it's sort of just overlaying it on top. It's not going to affect any other layers. It's just going to kind of drop it in wherever you were. The other option, when I'm in my footage panel and I've selected my in and out points, is the ripple insert. And to do this, make sure your playhead is somewhere in the middle of the layer that already exists in your timeline. And you press this, ripple insert, and what happens is it places this new layer in place, and it actually cuts the layer below it in half and moves it out of the way so that the new layer fits nicely in between both of them. So that can be really handy if you want to insert something right in between. So that's 2 ways of getting layers that you've clipped the in and out point for, trimmed it from your footage panel into your composition, simply just dragging it in from the source window after you've cut it, or using the 2 insert tools, the ripple insert or the overlay edit. So I'm going to leave it as just a overlay edit because I don't want to cut my other layer in half just yet. And now I've got 2 layers. And you see when the grayed out area is above the other layer, you still can't see it. The only time the layer actually exists for is the colored in part here where that exists. Does that make sense? Everyone kind of following along, or where is everyone? Lila? Griffin? Good? Colin, Kate? Good? Okay, cool. So unlike if you've used Premiere, which is the editing software, there's no easy way of cutting a clip with like a razor tool like you do in Premiere. So you saw before I was able to kind of break that clip in half by doing the ripple insert. The only true way to cut a clip along the playhead is actually to split it in half. And you can do that by going to Layer and, sorry, not Layer, where is it? It's under Edit, and it's called Split Layer. You see it here. And the command is Shift-Command-D. The shift is that arrow. And what this does is it actually splits the layer in 2, duplicates it over here so that you have 2 of it, and then splits it in 2, one above the other. And then if you wanted to, if you were only doing that to cut it, you could delete it. But a much easier way to cut something is really just to drag it to the size you want. So that's the only way to really cut it. Another way, or sort of the last way of sort of editing and changing your in and out points, well, there's 2 more, sorry. What am I doing here? Okay, so the next thing you want to do is turn on down in the corner here of your layer panel over here. You want to press this button here, expand or collapse the in-out duration stretch panes. And you see that brings in all these fun numbers here. I meant to do this before when we were dragging layers around, but this allows you to see what you're actually doing when you're dragging the in and out points of a layer. You can see it's in here and it's out here are changing, as well as the duration number. The duration number is changing to match not the duration of the whole layer, but just the duration of what's being used in the timeline, which is the colored in area. You can also click these numbers and drag them or scrub them, and that allows you to move the in and out points around as well. You notice, though, when you drag duration, that's actually doing something else, and that's something we'll talk about later, but what you're actually doing is you're actually stretching time, and you can see in this last column, stretch, that I've increased the time of this layer to 140% of the original time. So you don't really want to grab the duration around. If you want to change the duration, you should just change the in and out points. If you're just trying to make it longer and show more of it, is what I mean. You want to actually just change the in and out points. Don't try changing the duration, because that's going to give you like slow motion, other stuff like that, which we'll talk about a little more later. The other way to edit a layer is once you have it in, say you have these all nicely organized in a certain way, but you decide maybe you want to use a slightly different part of the camel walking layer, but you don't want to move it because it's so like neatly, nicely organized where it should be. Maybe there's lots of other stuff going on. There's another tool called the slip tool, which actually allows you to move, sort of imagine moving what the layer is, moving the layer under its in and out points. And so the way to do that is you get the big arrow with the two sides if you hover over the ghosted out area of your layer. And if you drag that, you're actually moving what the in and out points are referencing on the layer, but not changing where the layer is. So this sort of, imagine this greener colored in area as like a container, and you're moving something under the container, but the container is always holding the same amount of clip, because that's sort of the in and out points that are containing it. So that allows you to make sort of smaller adjustments to what's being referenced by the in and out points here. If, for example, if you were super zoomed in and you couldn't see the grayed out area of this middle layer, but you wanted to move it, one thing you do is just zoom out till you can see them. But if for whatever reason that's not an option, there's another tool up here called Pan Behind Tool Y. And in this case, it does the same thing and allows you to sort of slip the layer around. And since I'm so zoomed in, it's really hard to see because I'm not moving it very far, but I am moving it. There we go. So that's slipping a layer, and that allows you to sort of adjust it. So all of these are ways of sort of creating the same, zoom way out, creating the kind of layer you want, showing what you want in here. And this is really just with footage. Pictures, you don't need to do this with because they are not changing. But this allows you to choose the parts of footage and to kind of arrange, much like you would in Premiere, layers in your timeline. So there's another technique which can be really useful. This is more for slideshows or animation or something like that, but I'll just show you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my composition much longer. We're going to go a full minute, so 0, and put a minute here. So this is quite long, and I'm just going to take a couple different of these animals. Let's say little fox, orange lizard, reptile eye, and cat watching. I really don't know what any of these are. And I'm going to bring them all in. Let's bring one more. Antelope, deer. And you see I've just dragged and dropped them all into my timeline, and they're all just stacked on top of each other. You can see if you hide them that they're all just sort of stacked on top of each other. Another handy tool before we actually start with what I'm about to show you is you can solo a layer. If you ever want to see just one layer, you can press this little, if I zoom in, click the circle into this icon box under the circle here next to the eye, and that's going to only turn on the top layer. So that doesn't really matter for the top layer, but for the second layer down, which is orange lizard, if I click solo, it's going to only show me the orange lizard. If I click reptile eye, it's only going to show me the reptile eye because it's just soloing just that layer no other layers are visible right now. You can also have two turned on at once to solo two layers at once. This doesn't really matter since it's taking up the full frame, but if you wanted to see just two layers at once and none of the other layers beneath them, you can solo just these two and you see them turn sort of on and off. Okay, so that's back to normal. Okay, so we've got all these layers stacked up here. You can create a really quick sort of pre-built video for you by doing something called sequencing layers. This is really useful, especially for animation and other stuff like that, and I'll show you why. So I'm going to select all my layers, and I'm going to go to, at the top, Animation Keyframe Assistant, Sequence Layers. You can also control-click on the layers themselves, Keyframe Assistant, Sequence Layers. And it's going to open this little dialog box. When I click Sequence Layers, we're just going to ignore all the options here now and hit OK. It lines up all my layers so that it makes a nice little video out of all of them. And you notice when you do that, it actually just lined them all up back to back to back, just sort of butt splicing them together with no overlap. If your layers have certain amounts of in and out points on them, I'm going to throw that in there, and then we're going to have to do the sequence again. It'll line them up to their in and out points back to back to back to back with all the ghosted out area just sort of hiding out of the way. So this could be really useful if you were bringing in, say you were drawing an animation and then you wanted to digitize it. If you had hundreds and hundreds of scans of all your sort of drawings, you could bring them all into After Effects and tell it to sequence them, and it'll line them all up for you. Though there's another way to do that as well, which I'll show you. But let's go back to before, when they weren't sequenced, and do sequence layers again. And now let's click overlap. And what this is going to do is it's going to actually overlap the ends of the layer. So let's say we just want it to overlap by 1 second. I'm going to type in 1 here. And then we're going to turn on a transition. There's two kinds of transitions offered. The first is dissolve front layer. And the second is cross dissolve front and back layers. I'm going to choose dissolve front layer and press OK. And what this does is you can see all the layers are still stacked in order, but they actually overlap each other by 1 second. And you can also see, if you watch the video, that there's a nice fade out in between each layer. What's actually happening here is you can see that the program has built an automatic opacity keyframe to fade out each layer. But it only puts it on the top layer. That was the choice we made with front dissolve only. It fades the top layer out so that the bottom layer can appear underneath it. So I've made a quick little Nat Geo video here of fading between different stuff happening in the Sahara Desert. It's not very good. I wouldn't put it in this order, but it was completely at random. I'll show you what it looks like if you do the other option under transitions here, the cross dissolve front and back layers. This can be useful at times, but it's not going to look good for us right now, because what it does is it fades out the back layer at the same, or it fades in the back layer at the same time it's fading out the front or the top layer. So you see at this halfway point in between, there's nothing really there, and it looks kind of ghostly. And it looks okay right now because the background of my composition is black. But let's say for some reason the background of my composition was red. You'd see that it looks kind of weird for it to fade through the red or something like that. Or even if there was nothing there, if I set a, I figured how you do it, set a transparent background. Anyway, so it looks okay under black, but it's really much better to do the, if you're using sort of full frame, taking up the whole size of the composition frame, to sequence them with the front dissolve front. And it builds this nice little transition for you. So related to this, anyone have any questions? Sorry, following along pretty well. It's okay if you didn't do it, but if you sort of see what's possible there. The lock over here. So the lock is actually really useful. I should have pointed that out since I was over there. What the lock does is it's actually just going to lock a layer. So let's lock Little Fox, which is the first one here. I click the lock on. I can't do anything to it. I can't even click on it. I can't pick it up. I can open it here, but I can't change these numbers. Everything is locked. So it's really nice. It just stops you from messing with it. If you're satisfied with a layer, especially good for like a background layer that's just going to sit at the bottom and not change. You see I can't even change the order of Little Fox. So lock Little Fox down there and nothing can be changed about it. So that's really useful. Thanks for that. The other thing I wanted to show you, and this is very much related to this, sort of the auto building of sequences, we're actually going to go in, and if you already imported this, you might need to import it again. So this is a different kind of importing here. I'm going to go to Import, File, and look in the Sources folder for the folder called Muybridge Sequence. This is not Sahara footage, but I couldn't find a good set of pictures to use from the Sahara footage for this. And you see if you open the folder, don't click OK or Open yet. You see I've got 10 images here named Muybridge 1 through 10. And if you just click through them here, you can see it's stills of this guy walking. So Edward Muybridge was a one of the pioneers of video or film in general. He was a photographer and he was fascinated with motion, and he would take really high shutter speed pictures of motion. One of his most famous things is there was he had a rich friend of his who placed a bet with another rich guy that when a horse is galloping, there's a certain moment where all the horse's hooves are off the ground. And the guy was like, no way, there's no, like, that doesn't happen. Horses don't fly. They've always got one hoof on the ground. And so the rich guy hired Muybridge to take really fast multiple pictures of a horse as it ran. So he set up cameras that were all linked together to sort of trigger each other to go off, lined up down the horse track, and they sent a horse galloping across, and he took all these pictures and proved that there is a moment where the horse's hoof, I think that's right. It's either that there is or there isn't. That kind of ruins the story. Anyway, but it was this kind of stuff, and at the same time, people were doing some of those like sort of flipbook style animation, but people were really fascinated with capturing motion because this was going to be the precursor to video. And so what we're going to create here is actually basically a video out of this sequence of images. So this is something you might do with like a time lapse, or as I said, an animation. So let's select them all, and down here you can see enable all acceptable files, that's fine. Format TIFF, that's the kind of image it is. Import as, and if you just select one, it'll allow you to, if I select all of them, it'll have this option here, TIFF sequence. You can also just select one and have that selected, and it'll grab all of them. But if you say yes, TIFF sequence, what it's going to do is it's going to bring all of these images together, and it'll say JPEG sequence if it's a sequence of JPEGs. When you press open, what it does is it actually doesn't import the individual pictures. It creates basically a video of all these images together. And if you bring this into your composition, or in this case I'm just going to make a new composition by dragging it over the little composition icon. Let go. There we go. It brings it in here, and you have just one sequence with all the pictures laid out in a row. And if you hit play, you see you've got all 10 pictures being played all at once. Now, this doesn't look very good because it plays it back really, really fast, and there were only 10 pictures, so it's not very long. So one thing you can do, so that's a way of bringing all these pictures in a sequence, in order, and instead of having to deal with all these pictures individually, it brings it all in as a single sequence that you can bring into a composition, much like a video. So we've noticed, though, this is a little too fast. If you play it, it's just like, what is going on? He's just walking really fast. So what you can do is if you go up into your project window here and either control-click on this Muybridge sequence and do Interpret Footage Main, or just at the bottom there's this little button that's also Interpret Footage. That's going to open this new dialog box, and there's a lot of uses for this. The main one that we're going to use right now is assume this frame rate. Right now this is matching our composition to assume a frame rate of 24 frames per second. And that's great for video and everything else. This is a way of doing slow motion and stuff like that later, when you can interpret footage on more than just a sequence of images. But let's set this to, let's say we want it half speed, so we'll do 12 frames per second. Other stuff you can do real quick while we're in interpret footage is you can loop stuff. So if you select some footage that you want to loop and you tell it to loop, you can type in like loop 2 times. So let's do that, might as well. And we're going to loop our little sequence. So now when I play it, you see it's still really dang fast, but let's make this longer. And I'm actually having to change the composition settings to match what I did here. By making it longer, you can see I made this a lot longer by slowing it down 50% and then by looping it once. You see when I play it, he walks a lot slower, and that's really nice. It's almost the right speed of walking. So that's another way, very similar to sequencing all our footage layers like we did with all our Saharan desert animals. This allows you to sort of quickly manipulate and automate dealing with something like a bunch of still images of motion. So this is, again, good for if you were to import an animation that had been carefully laid out in all these JPEGs, you would end up with something like this. So, does that make sense? Questions about that? Lila? Did it not import? Okay. I know I moved through that one a little fast here. So you didn't import it right. So let's just leave it on. Do it again. Not all of it. That's fine. So go to import again. And when you click on it, hit options. You want to import it as a TIFF sequence. What this does is it brings up all of it. You see that it's just one sequence imported, and then I made a new composition. Now if you just hit play, you see they're all right there. Then I went to, we can do your composition settings first. It's still fast, right? Because all you've done is just add it to the see. So then the other thing I did was I right-clicked on this, and did interpret footage, and then you can assume a frame rate of a lower amount. So right now it's assuming 30, 10, and 5, and 6. You see how much longer? See how much longer? Now you can drag it out. So the next thing I wanted to show, let's say we do actually, I just helped Lila over there, and she made hers a lot slower than I made mine. Let's say we make it like 4 frames a second. Make it just really long. And if you hit play, you can see he's walking, and it's real slow, because actually what's happening, if you click through one frame at a time, which you can do either by going here to next frame or page up and page down allow you to click through one at a time. I don't have that on my laptop keyboard. You see that it's every, like, I think 6, if my math is right. Every 6 frames is the next picture. So one picture stays on for 6 frames. And so that's why we get this really choppy look, because it's actually pausing on each picture to show us each frame. So there's a handy little technique that can kind of help this, or at least make it look a little smoother, and that's called frame blending. And this will help us fix the choppiness. So frame blending is kind of similar to motion blur in that you can use it in the same way and that you sort of turn it on in the same way. So over here, right next to the motion blur in your layer is the frame blending. Looks like a film strip with another sort of ghostly film strip behind it. And if you click under that, in the box you see the same exact icon up here. So now you're doing what's called frame mix. There's 2 different kinds of frame blending. The first one is frame mix. Now if I press play, it looks exactly the same. So frame mix by default does not actually show up until you do your final render. But if you turn on frame mix here, you can see it just like when you turn on motion blur here, the sort of larger icon for your whole panel. So I've turned on frame blending. I'm going to press spacebar. And you see what it does is it adds a little bit of a fade out. It's still very choppy, but that kind of makes it look a little nicer. The other one, and I tried this earlier and it didn't work with this footage, so we're going to do it with a different piece of footage, but the other kind of frame blending, if you click the same icon box again, it gives you this sort of 3 dots in a column and 3 dots in a column spread out with an arrow in between them. This is called pixel motion. Pixel motion is a very powerful little device, And what it tries to do anyway, because it won't do it well on this one, I'll show you, is it tries to interpolate everything that's going on in each frame, and then it tries to invent the pixels that would exist in between, and you see what it's going to happen.
Whoa.
So you can see it's actually like
Let's try.
kind of cool, and it's trying, and it makes the legs almost move like together as they should. It's awkward when they cross each other, and the background gets like the sort of grid background that changed between each picture gets kind of crazy.
Where was that?
This is under the same frame blending icon if you press it again. So nothing, frame mix, and then pixel motion. So let's do it on another thing. So let's go get one of our favorite animals. Let's try running out, because I think it has a lot of motion. That was running in. Sorry, I didn't read when I clicked. Let's try running out. This is a, what's that, a bobcat or something? Yes? Okay, and I'm going to go back. Let's take all this stuff out of our camels sequence. This isn't a camel sequence anymore, or a composition, but that's okay. So here's running in a composition, and it's the little bobcat running in, and it's raining a lot. He's hiding from the rain. And what we're going to do is we're going to interpret footage again. So let's, in this case, it's not saying assume, but conform to frame rate. So let's conform to frame rate. Let's make it 5. So that's a 5 out of 60. It's 1/6 of the speed. And then I extend it out, because you see it still gives you the initial, but let's extend it out. And we press play. So there's the bobcat kind of running into the shelter. So it's really just the first couple seconds of this that are going to matter. What? So if you go into the source window and you click interpret footage again, like we did with the sequence of images, and then you get conform, there's an option conform to frame rate. I just did 5 frames per second. Since the initial frame rate was 30, that made it 1/6 of the time, right? So there's 5. And you see and again, I have no idea if this is going to work, because this isn't the one I tried it on earlier, but that's okay. So there's our bobcat running into its sheltery cave. So let's now go in and let's turn on our pixel motion. Turn it on here, and let's see what happens. Nope, didn't work. Still kind of cool looking, though. I think it's the rain throwing us off. Let's find something else. Sorry, guys, I didn't plan which one to use. What does the deer do? Ugh. Let's do the scorpion. That's gross. Ugh, I hate scorpions. Okay. So we're going to do the same thing. I just wanted to see if this would work, because I didn't know about this. I knew about frame blending, but I was trying to read about what was going on with the other option, the pixel motion. All right.
When is interpret footage grayed out? When does that happen?
If you're not selecting any footage in your source window, maybe?
So it has to be in the source.
Yeah, you can't select it in the layer panel. You have to be in the source window to interpret your footage. Because what you're doing is you're changing the footage before the footage ever has become a layer. So we've slowed our scorpion down to 1/5 the speed. This is it before pixel blending, and it kind of chops along with its legs moving all slow like. Ugh, it's still gross. Let's turn on pixel motion, and looks pretty good actually. It kind of smooths out the space in between. There's definitely some weird stuff going on under the shadow of the claws with like the sand, but I don't know. That looks not half bad. It's pretty good slow motion. I don't think the Sahara footage was best suited to the magic pixel motion, but because of all the sand and the rain. Yeah, it's getting a little weird at the end. And the words down at the bottom aren't working that great either. So anyway, that's another way you can sort of smooth out stuff. Didn't work very well with Moy Bridges' walking guy, but the sort of frame blend itself did, just the fade. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to show you, there's one more file. Well, there's a lot more files in our little file thing, but one more thing I wanted to show how to import, because this is a really important little thing to know, especially if you're working with things that you created in Photoshop. So in the sources folder, there's something called Sahara Map 480.psd, This is a Photoshop file. That's the .psd part. So import as, and you don't want to import as footage. See here, you get the option import as footage. What you want to import it as is a composition, but not just a composition. You want to retain your layer sizes. And when you do this and hit open, actually it asks you again. I think you could have skipped that part. I did it before. But import kind, composition, retain layer sizes. And then under layer options, we want to choose editable layer styles. And you hit OK. What this actually does is you see here, it's brought in two things into our source window. It's brought Sahara Map 480 as a composition. That's that icon. And it's actually created a handy little folder. And all of these things you see in here are actually the layers of the Photoshop file. So I can open, I should have actually, let's do that real quick. This is what it looks like in Photoshop. You guys don't have to open it in Photoshop, but this is the file, what it looks like when you open it. I don't want to update right now. In Photoshop. So it's this nice picture of the Sahara Desert, and you can see over here, if you know Photoshop, this is the layer panel in Photoshop, and these are the layers. So I'm going to just turn them on and off so I can see them. The first is a text layer that just says Sahara. The second is this land mass covering bit that shows us what the desert actually looks like. The third is the text. I guess that's the text for all the country names. Then we've got stroke. Stroke just means the lines that are dividing the countries. Countries, that's the color of the countries, and then background, that's the background. So anyway, that's what this file looks like in Photoshop. And since we imported it nice and careful with its editable layer styles, that's actually what the file looks like in After Effects as well. So I'm going to actually double-click this composition to open it on up. And look, it's the same set of layers, Sahara, the actual landmass, text, the stroke, the colors, and the background are all right here in After Effects as well. So this is actually really awesome because it means that you can create a file in Photoshop and then bring it and all its separate layers into After Effects and then start animating it there. So you can imagine maybe something we could do, I bet we could do this real quick and simply, is we could just have the Sahara Desert appear on top of the continent and all the countries. So I've taken the Sahara landmass shape and made it 0% opacity, and I'm going to turn on keyframes for that. We'll do the same for the text that says Sahara Desert. Make that 0, turn it on. The length when you import a still image is a default, so mine, I guess, defaults to this amount. That's kind of weird. But we're going to set our opacity to 100 there. Oops.
How do you change
The what? The length of what? Of the... you can change the length of the still image in the same way that we change the length of the layers, just by dragging the sort of in and out points here. If that makes sense. You can also, I believe you can open it, I don't know how to do it with this part, but because it's already a composition. But if you open a single still image, I don't have a single still image in here. Anyway, I believe you can do it in the footage window as well. But you can drag them, just like you did the in and out points, to change the length. Anyway, so I've got Sahara Desert. Did I do that? Yes. And then the actual bit of shape that is the Sahara, drag that to the end, 100. And now, with this nice Photoshop file that someone else built, I can have sort of this bit fade in and tell us this is the Sahara Desert as it exists on top of the continent of Africa. So that's a reason you can bring it in. I mean, you could also have it simultaneously, maybe it would fade the countries out. So let's say about here, countries and their names, I'm going to fade out so that they're not there anymore. So I just sort of threw that together, but you see you can make a sort of animation of a map or an image like this very handily and easily if you have it all pre-built in Photoshop and then you bring it into After Effects, but making sure you import it the right way. So not the most thrilling thing to do, but once you do it, there's a lot of power you have at your fingertips for what you're able to do with it. I should have reset all of those. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about, oh, what have I done? Let's just, can I open it again? I've really messed with the order here. I'm sorry. Yeah, see you, Griffin. All right, well, I messed that up. Sorry, guys. I'm going to just re-import it because I don't know how to fix that. Okay, so here's our Sahara map again. So the next thing I wanted to do is work with something called blending modes. So blending modes are the way layers sort of affect and talk to each other. To get to blending modes, first we have to go over here into our layer area and do toggle switches modes. And that's going to turn on a few more things here. The one we're focused on right now is the column labeled mode. So right here, toggle switches modes. And you notice this hides some of our other information. We can always get that back later. It's just trying to save space for us. So toggle switches and modes. And you see it brings in these little drop-down menus that are right now labeled as normal. But when you open it up, you get this long list. These are different blending modes. And this is the exact same list you'll see in Photoshop if you're doing this in Photoshop, which can do the same kind of thing, blending layers together. So these are sorted sort of roughly by what they do. This first section up here, darken, multiply, that always makes it kind of a darker thing. And blending modes are always two layers that are sort of blended together, as if they've been sort of blended via opacity, but in a different way. The second layer is like lightening things, add, lighten, screen. That makes things lighter. This third one is kind of, it changes the light mostly, and it sort of intensifies the difference between them. That's kind of hard to explain. This next one, I don't even half understand. This one's color, and down here, I've never used these. I don't know what they're for. To be perfectly honest, I don't know what half of these do. I just sort of click on them when I want them. But I'll show you a couple that I think are really handy. Let's get our nice landscape image back in here. What I think we're going to make when we're all said and done is kind of an animated infographic of the Sahara Desert, because that's the sources that we have to work with. So I'm going to grab landscape, and I'm going to bring that guy in here as well. And you see landscape takes up the whole frame, and that's fine, I think. But for now, let's not have it do that. So I'm just going to shrink it down, just transforming it smaller, as if it's kind of what is the Sahara Desert. And I'm going to put it right here. So that's kind of cool, but it looks awkward because it's just sort of smack right on top of there. So, I mean, we've talked about doing opacity stuff. We could just bring the opacity of the Sahara Desert down a bit. But you see, it really doesn't look good. There's sort of, it's too busy. You can't really see what you're working with there. And so this is why we use blending modes. So let's just try a blending mode out of the blue. I've clicked on the drop-down menu. Let's try darken. That's interesting. That's kind of cool. But I don't like that. Let's try multiply. I think multiply is a really great blending mode. What multiply does, as far as I can tell, is it makes everything a little bit darker, except for the whitest parts of this frame that seem to be allowed to bleed through a little more. So you see what we've done is we've made this sort of mixed sort of background image. Doesn't look great on top of here, but that's okay. But it's a nicer, deeper color, and it's sort of sharing the color with whatever's below it. So it's primarily this tan background. Let's try another mode. Let's try just sort of the color burn. You see the color burn really does some interesting stuff here, especially when you bring it over these sort of pastel-y colors of the countries. So you can see you can really spend a lot of time messing with these. Oops, I zoomed in a bit. Messing with these blending modes. Add is more of a lightening one. Add is kind of the opposite of multiply. It really brightens everything. Lighten as well. I don't even know what that's doing. Screen, another way of brightening things, maybe not as intense as lighten. And if any of these, you know, if you feel like they're too much, let's go back to add. You can always then bring the opacity of that layer down and get a little less of the effect. So that's really handy. The other thing you can do is you can actually duplicate this layer and have it do two different blending modes and have them kind of work together. So I've selected the layer. I'm going to go to Edit Duplicate or Command D. And you see two layers that are both adding, and they're not linked, so if I move them, they move together. Or they don't move together. But if you make one kind of darker and one lighter, it actually almost makes the same thing again, as if it was normal. But you could do instead something like, let's try hue. I don't know what that's going to do. But hue and saturation. And so you see when you have two, they're separate, they look like this. When you add them together, they look like that. So go back to just having one. One more blending mode that I think comes in a lot of handy and that I use, this is one I actually use the most because I don't use these all that often, is overlay. Overlay kind of, it basically just overlays one over the other, but it gives the top one still a richer, more saturated look, as opposed to when you sort of do some of these, they get washed out. So overlay is quite nice. And as I said, if you think it's too intense, you can bring the opacity down a bit and get a little softer thing going on there. I feel like it looks the best when it's right here in the middle. So let's leave it. Let's bring it back to normal for now, and let's make it bigger and 100% opaque. Sort of reset it to everything. So this is what it looked like before. We'll get back to our sort of desert map in a minute. The other thing I wanted to show you about how you can edit a layer, other than just the blending mode, is with effects and presets. So effects are kind of everything in After Effects. That makes sense, right? And you can get your effects in two ways. One is you can go up here to Effect in the top menu, and it's got all these different options, and you open them up, and there's all kinds of stuff in here. And again, I don't know what half of these things do. I kind of find stuff as I need it and learn what it does once I get it. So there's effects for color correction, effects for blurring, effects for generating things. Let's generate a checkerboard. I don't even know what that is. That's crazy. Looks kind of cool though. You can change the width of the checkers. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. The other way to get effects, which I think is really convenient, yes?
Could you drop a diamond and make it grow?
What do you mean drop a diamond and make it grow?
Keyframe.
You could, but what is this in reference to?
To the checkerboard.
Yes. Yes, you could.
Drop a diamond.
Sorry. The other way to get effects is over here in the effects panel, which is automatically there in your standard workspace, but you can also get it by going to Window, Effects and Presets. Let's make this a little bigger so I can actually see it. And these are all the same ones we saw before: blur, color correction, generate, perspective, simulation. So you can go and open it over here. The really nice thing about this window is, one, it's always open, and two, you can actually search. So if you want to search for a blur, you actually open all the different blur options and you can see them here. So if you know your effects well and it's like, I want, you know, channel color, or sorry, channel mixer, that's it. You type in channel and there's only a couple effects for channel. So let's get a blur. I'm going to type in blur. I know I like fast blur. There's only two of those, so fast blur. So to add a blur or to add any effect, you then grab it from here and you can drag it right on top of the composition, and you know where you're dropping it because the little triangular shape appears. You can also drag it and drop it on top of the layer in the layer panel over here. And the other option is, if you've already got the layer you want to put it on selected here in the layer panel, so I've got landscape selected, you can double click and you get fast blur. So nothing's happened yet because this one doesn't automatically do anything, but you see over here where the project window is usually, you've opened a new panel called the Effect Controls panel. And this is where you're going to see all the effects that are affecting a certain layer. So right now it's the effect controls for the landscape layer. And you see fast blur, there's the one I just added, and it's got a couple different options over here. These are sort of the properties of the layer. So we've got blurriness, and it's got a little number 0.0 that we can scrub. That's why it's blue. You can also click and type, and if you click the drop down, you get a little slider as well. And you can see already, as I slide it, I make it blurrier and blurrier, or scrub the number, or type something in. So let's say we do 100%. It's pretty much gone. So let's bring it down to maybe about here. It's very blurry, very out of focus at 27% blurriness. If you notice, though, one thing that's happening is the edge of the sort of landscape layer is going away. Now that it's okay sometimes, but usually I like to have it go all the way to the edge. So you just have to do this little checkbox called Repeat Edge Pixels, and that fills in that gap. Now, the nice thing about layers is you can keyframe them just like you can keyframe any of the other properties of, or the nice thing about effects is that you can keyframe them just like you can keyframe any other properties of a layer. So I'm going to say by the end of the sort of landscape layer, I want it to be, you know, this blurry at 60%. And I'm going to turn on my keyframe right here and bring it back to the beginning, and I'm going to set it all the way back to 0. Now, you don't see the keyframes down in your window unless you open up under landscape in the layer panel down here the effects, and this will show all the effects. We're going to open fast blur, and you can see you can also do the editing down here of those effects. You can do anything you can do in the effect controls down here under the effects sort of options of the layer. And you see there's those 2 keyframes I've placed. And so what we've done is we've animated blurriness to be added over the 4 and a bit seconds. So we watch it, and it's as if I've just really spun the camera out of focus for like a little blur out. Maybe we switch it so it's at like 100% blurriness at the beginning, and by the end it's in focus, sort of a rack focus in. It's a little slow and long and very out of focus to begin with, but it's nice. So you can animate effects in that way. So I'm going to delete fast blur for now and go back to my effects and presets. So the other thing over here, not only are there effects, but there are also presets. And there's these nice things called animation presets, and that's usually right at the top. If you can't see animation presets, go to this little, this is the options menu, these 3 lines, and just make sure it says show animation presets on this little drop down. But I think it's there automatically on Creative Cloud. And this has a whole host of stuff in here. It's got background, it's got behaviors. I don't even know what half of this is again. I kind of find it if I need it. So let's look at image creative. And what these are preset effects that are usually a combination of a number of effects. So let's try colorize infrared. We're going to drag that onto our layer. And you see it makes it look infrared. And it does a pretty good job right off the bat. But it also, in your effect controls, it opens what turns out to be 3 different effects it's using. It's using an effect called solid composite. That's the one at the top here. Levels, that's a very common effect. And then hue saturation. What's nice is it opens it over here, which allows me to then make my own adjustments. So solid composite is colored red. I'm wondering if I change, I don't know anything about this infrared option, but I'm wondering if I color it blue. Yeah, you see I can make some really interesting changes to this sort of infrared look if I change this color. I can change levels by dragging these sliders around. That's going to adjust sort of what it looks like in here. Hue saturation, I'm sure if I scroll this around, I change some interesting colors as well. But you see these presets are nice because they're all these pre-built effect combinations that do really handy things. So let's try mood lighting amorphous. Not sure what that's going to do. And you see it's created this kind of amorphous blob of lights. You see it on and off. And that's kind of an interesting look, I guess. And you notice what I'm doing up here is you can turn a layer on and off without deleting it, just sort of see what it looks like, a layer's effect, by clicking these little FX boxes up here. And these kind of check them on or off so you can see what they look like. So that's really handy. Now, a nice touch about all these presets is you can actually see what they look like before you ever add them in Adobe Bridge. Now, I don't have Adobe Bridge installed on my laptop right now, but if you want to look at presets, you go to Browse Presets, you click that, and it's going to open up another program called Adobe Bridge, and it'll show you with sort of a test image what every single one of these effects looks like. And that's really convenient. I didn't know about that until I was looking up a little more about presets, and I read about that. I haven't tried it yet, but it looks really cool. Another thing under presets which can be really interesting is behaviors. These are pre-built moves, animated moves, and other things like that. So let's do something called drift over time. Now that's going to look a little weird with this image at full size, so let's shrink it down. It's still going to look weird. It's not going to be something you would necessarily do. But let's add drift over time. And you see, now that I've got a lot of layers sort of available and possible, it's really easy to drop my effect on the wrong layer. So you really want to make sure you're on the right layer. and I'm going to add drift over time. Now what this does is it's going to actually build an animation for me, a position move with keyframes that are somewhere around here. Can't find them. That's going to change where this item is. So you see if I just hit play, it just kind of drifts along, moving along. So that's nice, but you can also change a lot of stuff over here. So you can change the speed and the direction. Let's say we wanted to go, let's click down here. Say we wanted to go almost down to the bottom left and a lot faster. Let's see what this looks like. So that's kind of handy because it builds in these nice things. So that's drift over time. Another one over here that I use a lot is wiggle, and there's a couple different kinds of wiggle. There's wiggle gelatin, which you'll understand in a moment, wiggle position, wiggle rotation, wiggle scale. And what wiggle does is it really basically animates a wiggle. The position, wiggle position, for example, will literally wiggle the position of this thing when you hit play. And you see, this is a pretty slow wiggle. It's kind of bouncing back and forth. You can make it a lot more frenetic by changing the wiggle speed way up, and this is going to look like an earthquake. Or if you use wiggle correctly, you can animate kind of a camera shake on something. So let's bring our layer back to its full size in the screen. Oops. And now we play it with its wiggle. That's too much. And that's too slow. So you see you have to really fine tune it, but you can make a nice sort of faked camera shake out of wiggle. So that's a little too camera shaky still. And I turned it completely off because I'm bad at dragging numbers around. So you can see that can be really useful. Yeah, that's a pretty good shake, as if someone's doing that handheld. There's other stuff too, opacity flash random. That's going to just flash it on and off at completely random bits. You can make like a sort of rave strobe light look out of this. Again, not sure why you do it with this kind of layer, but we're just playing with different presets. So those are the presets. Wiggle gelatin, as if it's made out of gelatin. Geez, that's hard to look at. But you can see as if whatever your layer is made out of jello and you're wiggling it. So it's very randomized in this case. So you see there's lots of stuff you can get out of these presets. Questions about effects and presets? We're just playing around here, having fun.
I'm having trouble doing anything to my wiggle speed and about. It seems like it's just always doing that, like regardless of.
Is it possible you have two wiggles applied at once? You scroll up in here.
Yes.
So what's happening is, and that's something to watch out for, is sometimes you can accidentally apply multiple of the same effect. And that can be a useful touch, but if they're doing the same thing and you're trying to adjust it, you can get stuck doing wiggles. Another thing with making layers cool and such, name of my thing, is layer styles. I'm going to delete that for now. We're going to use this nice text that someone built in Photoshop for us, Sahara Desert, and we're going to add a layer style. So layer styles are similar to effects, but it's a little different. And layer styles may be familiar from Photoshop or other editors as well. And there's not too many of them, so these are a little easier to learn. Layer styles include drop shadow, inner shadow, glows, bevels and embosses, satin, color overlays, and stroke. So drop shadow is a very common one, especially with text. This is going to allow your text to really stand out on your image as if it's sitting more three-dimensional on top of it. Now, once I've added my layer style, I go down here and you get this option for layer styles in here. You've got blending options and then just the drop shadow specifically. There's lots of options here. So you can change your drop shadow. Maybe you want to make it 100% opaque, so it's very black, but you want it to actually shine up. And you see you can move the angle of it around, the distance of the shadow, as if Sahara Desert is written way above Sahara Desert. The spread, that gets really weird really quick. The size actually is more of a, it sort of diffuses it. You see 0% is a very hard shadow. The bigger the size, the more diffuse it is until you just can't see it anymore. And there's a lot of other options here as well. Noise, that's kind of weird. Another thing you can do with layer styles is, let's go back to layer styles. This one I like a lot, bevel and emboss. This makes my Sahara Desert look really cool. It's got all this bevel and emboss. Not sure what that means. It's got the bevel and the emboss, guys. And you can see we can change the style of that. So we can do just an emboss. And that's as if it's sort of printed three-dimensionally on top like Braille. Pillow emboss, that's sort of an indent, I guess. An opposite emboss. I'm not sure what stroke emboss does. Inner bevels, outer bevels. So lots of cool stuff you can do here. And again, you can change the sort of settings down here to make it do different cool things.
Can you add text while you're in After Effects?
Yes. We're going to talk a lot about text in one of our other lessons, but there is a text command up here type tool. It adds a layer, and you can put text in it, and you can do so many things with it. Text is a lot of fun. So that's layer styles. And yeah. Then there's one other thing I really wanted to teach, and that is what's called an adjustment layer. So an adjustment layer, you can kind of imagine, adjustment layers are common to Photoshop and Premiere as well, and you can kind of imagine them as sort of like a ghost layer. It's a layer that doesn't exist except as a place to put effects, presets, blends, etc. So that can be really handy, because say, let's go get our effects and presets. Let's get an effect called twirl. If it lets me type, it's not letting me type. Why isn't it letting me type? Twirl. Twirl is a distort effect. And let's say I want to add it to my layers. I'm adding it to Sahara Desert. I'm adding it to the Sahara shape. I'm adding it to the countries. And if I do it, you see here I'm twirling my countries. That can look really cool. Let's twirl the word Sahara Desert, because I put it on there too. That's a twirl. And let's twirl the Sahara shape. So that's really cool, but they're actually all twirling differently. They're not the same twirl because I didn't apply it in a way where it would match. And even if I do set the settings of the twirl, the shape, the radius, the angle, all exactly the same, it'll still look different because it's being applied to different size layers. So say you wanted the twirl to twirl the whole thing as if maybe we're entering a dream state. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Sorry. I was talking down to you a little there. Didn't mean to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to create a file new, layer new, and you have to be in your project window to do it. Layer in your thing, whatever this is called, layer panel to do it. New adjustment layer. It's going to create this layer. This layer only exists as a spot to put things. It's a ghost layer. It's named adjustment layer, and it's on top of everything. So if I apply twirl just to our adjustment layer, and then I start spinning it, you see it spins everything. And see, that looks a lot better than when I was twirling everything individually. And if we animate our twirl, we can make it like we're going into a dream. Woo. So adjustment layers are nice because they apply your effect to everything below them. So you notice if we're halfway through our animated twirl, but if I move my adjustment layer down a level, it is no longer affecting Sahara Desert. If I move it down another level, it's no longer affecting the shape. If I move it down another level, it's no longer affecting country names, etc., etc., etc. So adjustment layers only affect everything that's underneath them. Yes?
If you wanted it to affect all of it and then only some of them, would you have to do two different?
You'd have to use different adjustment layers. So you could have a second adjustment layer. Let's just duplicate it. Copy and paste. Let's put this second one down just for the lower part. So now you'll see it's going to double twirl the bottom, I think, theoretically, maybe. I don't know. But this would be how you would have to do sort of more precise different moves. Yeah, so this will be, if you wanted it to already be twirled underneath and then for that to sort of catch up. That looks kind of cool, actually. So you have to have two adjustment layers for that. And you can adjust with the adjustment layer. Adjust. If you change the opacity of the adjustment layer, you're kind of adjusting the strength of the effect. Though in this case, because it's twirl, you're just kind of making the twirl half transparent. If if we change our adjustment layer to be an adjustment of color, for example, let's do channel mixer, apply it to our adjustment layer to make it super blue or something like that. You see if I change the opacity, I'm actually changing how the adjustment layer is working. Does that make sense?